Good evening and welcome. Anti-mosquito measures have been stepped up in Wong Chai Sin after the number of people with dengue fever rose to 11. Medical experts have urged people to stay vigilant, but say it's too early to tell if the city is dealing with an epidemic. As Kana Chu reports, they do think the government should improve its monitoring system of mosquitoes.
You can identify an Asian tiger mosquito by the black and white stripes on its body. This breed of mosquito is responsible for spreading dengue fever. Lion Rock Park, now identified as the main source of the current outbreak of dengue fever, was closed for 30 days, starting at 7 p.m. yesterday. Comprehensive anti-mosquito measures will be carried out during the closure to prevent the further spread of dengue fever. Despite heightened mosquito control measures, this infectious disease specialist says citizens shouldn't let their guard down.
The current OVHF system only provides information about 1 month after those figures are collected. It's time to think whether there could be some more real-time information, such as by expanding the current adult mosquito-based surveillance figure to larvae or pupa surveillance system.
He also noted that if new cases emerge in other districts in the next 2 to 4 weeks, it could mean that the virus had spread widely in the community already. Out of the 11 dengue fever patients, 9 had visited the now-closed Lion Rock Park prior to falling ill. This includes the 4 new diagnoses yesterday. A number of them also live in the Wong Chai Sin neighborhood, where the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department carried out anti-mosquito operations this morning. Pedestrian zones were closed so that drains could be cleared. A government interdepartment steering committee will implement a territory-wide anti-mosquito campaign for the coming 10 weeks. Kana Chu, TVB News.
A senior government official stressed national security legislation will not be implemented just because of a recent speech by Hong Kong independence advocate Andy Chan. But Patrick Nip simply says the legislation is a responsibility of the government. Our Caleb Leung has more details.
Hong Kong is once again debating about enacting national security laws under Article 23 of the Basic Law. This after the Foreign Correspondents Club invited Andy Chan, the Hong Kong National Party's convener, to talk about independence. Even Beijing officials have commented on the matter, with at least one asking the city to consider national security legislation. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Patrick Nip today said Andy Chan's speech violated the Basic Law.
因為基本法23條本身就係我哋係有個責任就要進行立法。
He said the government has the responsibility to legislate under Article 23. But he stressed Chan's speech has not accelerated the process. It's a matter of how to proceed with the legislation instead of whether to proceed, Nip noted. Nip also commented on Beijing's new policy of issuing residence permits to Hong Kong people who have lived on the mainland for 6 months. He noticed there are concerns that the policy includes no tax exemptions, which means these Hong Kong people would still have to pay mainland taxes. The Hong Kong government will bring up the matter during the next meeting of the Greater Bay Area's leading group. However, Nip noted that the issue is not easy to solve because it involves mainland's taxation system. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
The West Kowloon Cultural District Authority has terminated its contract with the financially troubled contractor Shin Chong. It's now looking for a replacement. The company had been responsible for overseeing construction for the $5 billion project, including the M Plus Museum, which is set to be completed by 2020. This morning, security officers were guarding the construction site, now left idle. The authority has ordered the site closed until further notice. The lawmaker explains how it should choose a new contractor to replace Sin Chong.
The authority owed Hong Kong a duty to carefully investigate into the financial and the professional aspects of the successor. So the authority probably should ask the interested parties to submit relevant information to prove their financial status.
Turning to news overseas, former UN chief and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Kofi Annan has died at the age of 80. Kofi Annan was one of the world's most celebrated diplomats. His foundation said he died after a short, unspecified illness. Annan spent virtually his entire career as an administrator in the United Nations. His charisma, cool-tempered elegance, and political savvy helped guide his ascent to become the first Black African Secretary General. He served 2 terms from 1997 to 2006. Midway through, he and the UN were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2001. Funeral arrangements will be announced later. Southern India is suffering from what's being called the worst flooding in a century. With more than 300 people killed, a mass evacuation is now underway.
Monsoon flooding has severely hit 12 of 14 districts in the southern state of Kerala. Heavy rains for the past 10 days is what triggered the flooding. It also caused landslides and home and bridge collapses, in addition to disrupting air and train services. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi flew over the worst-hit areas to survey the damage. It's a devastating blow to Kerala, a popular tourist destination with scenic landscapes, waterfalls, and beaches. While Modi promised to help with $70 million in aid, the government deployed multiple military units to help residents throughout Kerala state. The Indian Air Force is using helicopters to rescue thousands of Kerala residents who fled to their rooftops to escape drowning in floodwaters.
Continuous air sorties are being undertaken and people keep coming. Additionally, we have more than 40 teams of divers along with rubberized Gemini boats in 4 districts of Kerala.
More than 300,000 people have taken shelter in over 1,500 state-run relief camps. Still, authorities are being inundated with thousands of calls from stranded people still waiting to be rescued.
Initially, most of them were they were in Idiki and all when initially the landslides came through and they were rescuing people from stranded areas, creating bridges and all. Now the work has shifted more towards rescue from marooned areas.
That's exactly what India's Rapid Action Force is doing here. The personnel are braving gushing waters below to fashion a makeshift bridge. It allowed them to pass relief supplies to local residents cut off by dangerous floodwaters. So far, more than 1,000 people have lost their lives in 7 Indian states since the start of the monsoon season. While more heavy rainfall is forecast today, experts are now offering some hope. Rains are expected to subside by tomorrow.
Staying in South Asia, former cricket star Imran Khan was sworn in as Pakistan's prime minister today. The ceremony comes a day after he secured 176 votes in the National Assembly, defeating the opposition party candidate Shahbaz Sharif. Khan's Populist Party won the most votes in the July 25th election, but it failed to secure a majority in the 342-seat House. He becomes Pakistan's 21st prime minister. Khan was elected on a promise to reform a system rife with corruption and traditionally controlled by the country's powerful landowners.
Italian media say 3 more bodies have been found in the rubble of the Genoa Bridge collapse. That raises the death toll to 41. Today has been declared a national day of mourning in Italy, with a state funeral to be held in Port City's fairground. But as Alan Bookney reports, many families rebuffed the offer and chose to hold funerals in the victims' hometowns.
Anger and grief erupted at the funeral of 4 men who died, all friends in their 20s, from the Naples seaside suburb of Torre del Greco. There was bitterness towards authorities who allowed the bridge to get into such a state of disrepair that it collapsed. My son didn't just die, he was killed, said Roberto Battaloro, whose 29-year-old son died along with his 3 friends. They died a blameless death just for going on holiday. This Genoa resident said traffic on the bridge increased by more than 10 times in the past decade. He said it was a crucial route for commercial trucks.
There could be some faults of Autostrada in doing the proper maintenance, so kind of poor maintenance activity, but on the other side there is certainly a poor political activity in terms of not planning the alternatives to this infrastructure.
Residents had been complaining for years about the bridge's state of ill repair, saying chunks of concrete would often come crashing to the ground. Alan Buchnia, TVB News.
Autostrade per l'Italia, the infrastructure company that managed that bridge, is scheduled to hold a news conference later today. It will announce what initiatives it will undertake. It will be the company's first public appearance since Tuesday's disaster. Welcome back. A fire broke out at a Taipo housing estate this afternoon. 3 residents fell ill and were taken to hospital. Our Sharon Tang has more details.
Smoke gushing out, seemingly non-stop. The fire happened at around noon at Kwong Wai House in Kwong Phuc Estate. It all started when fire broke out in the kitchen of this flat on the 5th floor. A large amount of smoke also spread from the corridor to the staircases. External walls of nearby flats were also burnt and blackened by the smoke. A resident who also lives on the 5th floor said he immediately called the police when he saw the entire corridor filled with smoke. This man said almost all of the residents living in the block are elderly people. I knocked on every door telling them there was a fire and we had to leave, he said. I even brought 2 or 3 of the elderly residents to leave with me as I carried 2 water bottles, he added. Some residents said they heard continuous sounds of explosions. She said clothes hanging outside of the flat were on fire. Around 200 residents had to evacuate their homes. 1 man and 2 women felt unwell after breathing in too much smoke, including this 19-year-old female resident who lives in the flat where the fire broke out. The 3 were later taken to Alice Ho Miu Ling Nethersol Hospital in Taipo. The fire was put out an hour later. Initial investigations suggest there is nothing suspicious about the blaze. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
Traffic accident that claimed the life of a 4-year-old yesterday has prompted calls for a footbridge at the place where it happened. Transport Department officials and lawmakers, including Elizabeth Quat, inspected the accident scene on Clearwater Bay Road yesterday afternoon. A 4-year-old was hit and killed, that is, by a car while crossing the road with her mother and brother. Quat said a footbridge had already been requested on many occasions. Sai Kung District Councillor Yao Yak Lung said a letter of petition will be sent to Chief Executive Carrie Lam.
A new environmentally friendly scheme has been introduced to the Food Expo this year. It lets visitors borrow reusable boxes and utensils. But is it popular? Pinky Wong was there to find out.
These reusable boxes can be borrowed from this booth located at the first entrance. This visitor welcomed the initiative.
It's great. This recycled box, I can recycle it at the front of the lorry and then I get back my deposit.
Visitors simply have to pay a $20 deposit at the counter and return them as they leave. Some tourists also liked the scheme.
I think it makes a lot of sense to use reusable items. Well, I think it's unnecessary to use plastic.
The organizer, the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council, said they have lent over 2,000 sets of these boxes and utensils in the past 2 days. But these blue boxes don't seem to be highly visible on site. Plastic waste is still stacking up in the bins as exhibitors hand out food and drink samples in plastic containers.
I think there should totally be more promotion. I feel like everything is plastic. It's bad. I don't support that at all.
and environmentalists appreciated the effort, saying it's a good way to reduce disposable utensils, but more promotion is needed.
We can advance the publicity to the general public and align with all the retail stores to have them cooperate, and together it may create a better synergy so that the customers, they will sometimes not just rent the utensils, but they may bring their own utensils.
The organizer said it will collect feedback from visitors before deciding whether or not to continue supplying reusable utensils next year. Thank you all. TVB News.
China has lodged a complaint with the United States about a Pentagon report that China's military is likely training for strikes against the U.S. and its allies. During a return flight from a visit to South America, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis questioned China's expanding global influence.
There are concerns about what is China's design on the hemisphere. Is it scientific research with space tracking stations, or is there something more going on? Is it commercial, or is it espionage? And I heard it from a number of people, including from people who aren't even from the 4 countries I visited.
The Defense Ministry said the Pentagon report misrepresented China's strategic intentions and exaggerated the so-called military threat. It said China is on a path of peaceful development and pursues a defensive national strategy. The Pentagon report estimated China's defense spending exceeded 190 billion US dollars last year.
2 Catholic bishops offered public apologies for rampant sex abuse by priests in the U.S. state of Pennsylvania.
No words can return what has been taken from you. The church failed you, and for this I apologize. Upon learning of the allegations, I notified law enforcement and punished each individual, even though both had already been removed from ministry after previous allegations.
I voice again my heartfelt sorrow and sincere apology to all survivors of clergy sexual abuse. The practical changes to avoid repeating the sad and troubling past are in place and are being faithfully observed and will continue to be improved in our diocese.
A 2-year probe in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania determined at least 1,000 people, mostly children, were sexually abused. The abuse occurred in 6 Roman Catholic churches over the past 70 years by 300 clergymen. The Vatican expressed shame and sorrow, saying Pope Francis wants to eradicate this tragic horror.
Good night.